Okay, so there is more drama in the Marilyn Manson case, and specifically the lawsuit against him by Jane Doe. I already know her name, of course. Many people do, but Andrea, I know you're a very by the book person, so we're going to keep it at Jane Doe. But seriously, so there's been some news. There's some new legal filings. Do you want to explain it?
My understanding, I haven't looked over all of these filings at this point, but my understanding is that there was a request to continue the trial date that had originally been agreed by both sides that needed to happen because Marilyn Manson's devices, his computers, cell phones, things like that, they were seized by the LA County Sheriff's Office a while ago. I'm trying to think now how long ago that was. I mean, like a couple of years at this point almost.
A hell of a long
And
time.
they've been in their possession ever since, related to this ostensible criminal investigation that has been ongoing also for quite an extended period of time now. And so the argument was there's evidence on those devices that they need access to in order to be able to fairly present a case, defend a case at trial. And the judge has denied that request. So basically, the trial date remains set where it was, and Manson is expected to go forward to trial without the benefit of being able to access his own computers and cell phones and so forth.
So a long time ago, they raided his house or whatever, searched his house. They took all of his stuff. They took like for a long time to do an investigation. We know that the cops, the LA sheriff's investigators, handed their completed file over to the DA George Gascon, and he has been sitting on it because he just doesn't want to let go of this Marilyn Manson thing. He's like Captain Ahab with the whale, I swear. Marilyn Manson is now in this civil proceeding that this woman, this Jane Doe, has brought against him, and so the situation is that there's all of this stuff on his devices that he would need, and he is saying that he needs to defend himself in this suit and prove that this lady is lying, in my opinion and many others. And he just literally cannot get it from the government because the DA won't close the case. And so he's just stuck.
Well, there may be options that he has. And so, what happens with a search warrant? Police have the legal right to seize your property for purposes of a criminal investigation and hold on to it for a reasonable time, basically, as long as it is necessary for them to keep possession of it for investigation or for trial purposes. With something like a cell phone or a computer tower or something like that, this typically is not something that they need to hold on to for a very long time because they're not actually interested in the device itself. They're interested in the device's contents, and they obtain that through a forensic extraction. They will use a Celebrite extraction or something like that, like we saw in the Depp versus Heard case, to get the contents of that device into a readable format, a usable format, basically just get the data itself, and then they no longer need the device. So whether or not it's reasonably necessary for them to continue to hang on to these devices after all of this time depends on a lot of different factors. It depends on, number one, really, is your investigation still going? Like, really? Like, what are you actually still doing? What are you still trying to accomplish with this? Why do you need these actual physical devices themselves for purposes of the investigation? Why can't you just keep your extraction report and give the physical thing back to Mr. Manson? But then it also does kind of raise a question about whether Manson has even taken any steps of his own to try to recover any of this property. There are some steps that may potentially be available to him, but we don't know if he has tried any of those options.
Is this unusual? What's going on here?
It's unusual to the extent that the investigation is lingering like this. The way that it got referred, publicly by the LA County Sheriff's Office, saying, specifically, like, we're done. We are referring it for your prosecutorial decision. And then the DA very publicly handing it back to the LASO saying, no, we think there's more things for you to do. Uh, okay, that's fine, but now it's been like another year.
Mhm,
Okay. And
mhm.
so what realistically has been happening? Why is this being kept open so long? It's kind of important because it's got some significant implications, not just because Marilyn Manson can't get his property back, but the status of an investigation also has a connection with public records access. As you probably know, under the Public Records Act, there's an exemption for material that would potentially compromise an ongoing investigation. Well, once a matter is referred to the district attorney and a prosecutorial decision is made to either charge it or not charge it, then that's no longer a justification for withholding that information under the Public Records Act. So there might be some other reason why they wouldn't give it to you, but they can't just rely on this catch-all, investigative exception that they always like to invoke to protect their records. So keeping the investigation open not only is apparently allowing them to keep Marilyn Manson's property, not return him his own property that the government has taken without just compensation, which, the Fifth Amendment says they're not supposed to be able to do. But it's also potentially interfering with the ability of the public to learn about this investigation and to critique the decisions that have been made by these government agencies.
Is it possible I'll talk about the civil situation in a moment again, but, people have been asking me, is George Gascon, the LADA, is he going to close this case soon? I mean, he's up for reelection, right, pretty soon, but is he gonna close this case soon? If he gets kicked out, then surely the next person is gonna close it. I know nothing about this legal stuff, but George Gascon, clearly, it's evident, does not want to close this case and is not going
Mhm.
to. And there are reasons that I've talked about and others have talked about. For one thing, one of the main people on his sexual assault task force, someone he's really chummy with, is best friends with a woman who is suing Manson. And Gascon is super woke. I know people get tired of me using that phrase and they say it doesn't mean anything or whatever, but like whatever woke is, he's super woke. I mean, even the liberals in LA don't like him. And so he just seems completely resistant to clearing Manson. So here's my question for you. Can someone just remain uncleared after an investigation indefinitely? Could someone just go on for years and years with this hanging over their head? Like, is there no way to hold the government to account in this? To get the DA to get off his ass?
Such a great question, and it's really kind of the million-dollar question because there's so much discretion involved in prosecutorial decision making, and what's needed to be able to decide whether to charge somebody or not charge somebody. And so there's generally a lot of deference that is given to their decisions about those types of things. But you're absolutely right that discretion can very much be abused, because clearly the interest that the public has in these investigations is that they be done thoroughly, they be done efficiently, and justice is brought to bear as a result. And justice may either mean somebody is charged or somebody is exonerated, or at least not pursued for whatever reason.
I mean, it's
And
not like they couldn't reopen the case. I mean, if Gascon just doesn't want to make some final declaration on this, but it's like, okay, I don't have evidence. I'm going to close the case, and then
Mhm,
if I think I'm going to get evidence, then I
mhm.
can reopen it. Like, was that so crazy a thought?
Well, as we've indicated, the problem with that is it potentially opens it up then under the Public Records Act. And if this
Oh.
is something that commonly law enforcement doesn't always like close eyes on their work. This has been a high profile case. For that decision to be under public scrutiny is often something that people in this position are not looking for. So if he does that, if he closes, as soon as he closes the investigation, then yeah, he has to give Manson's property back, and
Mhm.
this information is potentially then publicly available. So Those are
When you say this
potential.
information publicly available, what do you mean? You mean
Mhm.
that if this were closed, I could then have access to whatever was on Manson's computer that they found? Or what do you mean by that?
No, that would likely be subject to an exemption for like personal material, confidential material, stuff like that. But as far as like the police reports, the
Uh,
information that they obtained, quite a lot of that can often be discoverable. In fact, last time I dealt with it, California has a specific statute that even notwithstanding this investigative exemption, there are specific categories of information that they're required to provide to the public for certain types of like information, certain types of inquiries. Once that exemption goes away, anything that is not exempt under some other provision of the Public Records Act has to be disclosed.
okay, so are you saying that this just occurred to me? Are you saying that if the police, let's say that the police in their investigation, the detectives, as I believe, found out that this is a hoax,
Mhm.
are you saying that
Potentially covering that up. They're potentially covering that
because
up.
you're saying that if Gascon closes the case, then
Yes.
there will be some evidence potentially pointing to the fact that this was a hoax by Evan Rachel Wood and some of these other conspirators, and that information indicating that could be made public. So really, I
Mhm.
thought Gascon was just trying to save face as this woke DA, but you're saying that actually this could be part of trying to cover up things for Evan Rachel Wood in a way?
Potentially. It's
Wow.
consistent with that.
Wow. I had been wondering why Gascon cleared Army Hammer. You remember
Mhm.
that, he cleared Army Hammer.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'd been thinking, okay, I get it. Manson, he's scarier seeming than Army Hammer. The Army Hammer thing was always ridiculous. Like nobody was really afraid he was going to come over and cannibalize them, right? But I
Yeah.
was like, okay, the Manson maybe it's just an image thing, or it's the fact that he's got that woman on his task force who's best buddies with one of the accusers suing Manson. But what you've said is so much more plausible.
Well, and I think you have to look deeper than that too, because you have to look at Evan Rachel Wood and her political connections, her political background. Quite a few of those who are, still apparently sticking with her. It wasn't that long ago that the senator that sponsored the Phoenix Act originally,
Oh yes.
passed some new type of legislation, did a big shout out to Evan Rachel Wood on Instagram. So there is much more of a deeper connection there
Whoa.
with specifically the Democrat political establishment. Remember all of those when Evan Rachel Wood gave her testimony on Capitol Hill, and there were several Congress people who then followed up to write their letters to the FBI, encouraging them to do an investigation, to open an investigation into her testimony. So, yeah, this has gone quite deep, and there's potentially a lot of people with a lot of political connections
Mm,
who stand to have a lot of egg on their face
mm,
if
mm,
this comes out as a hoax.
mm. Wow. Wow, that's intense. That is intense. What I mean, okay, so if you're Manson and you're caught in the middle of all this, I'm sorry, no, it's not
This
funny at
started
all,
with
but
such a simple problem and it turned into such a big issue.
well, I guess it never started simple, but oh my god, this is like the Oliver Stone movie JFK. I want Oliver Stone to do a movie on the Manson hoax, and I can die
That
content.
would be good. That would be great.
So tell me, like, if you're Manson, you're stuck in all this shit. I mean, do you have
Yeah.
any words?
Yeah, well, so I don't know specifically what the California process is. They may have one in the statute. So, for example, in Washington, where I practice, we have a court rule that deals specifically with kind of what happens when a search warrant gets issued, what happens with that property. That rule sets up a process for me to be able to go to court, file a motion if I think the state doesn't need to hold on to my property anymore. They need to give it back to me, and then that goes to the judge. The court is entitled to, require an explanation from the state. Why do you still need this property? They're going to need something a little bit more than, well, our investigation is still open. Okay, but why then do you need this physical computer tower to do your investigation? So that's how we deal with it in Washington. I have dealt with this before in cases where police have held on to property, longer than they're entitled to for a variety of reasons. So there may be something similar to that in California. If they don't have a specific process, there's also a common law cause of action that's called replevin. And replevin is it's a like one of these old ancient English types of cases where you're basically saying somebody else is wrongfully holding on to my property, and so it's an action to compel them to return it to you. That is potentially available in a case like this because, again, it's his property. Just because police have the ability to seize it, the authorization, under the search warrant to seize it, that doesn't give them the right to keep it or to
Mhm.
keep it indefinitely. It's because we're balancing these Fifth Amendment takings kind of consideration, right? The government doesn't get to take your property even for public use without fair compensation. Um, because those things are balanced, the police can only hang on to it to the extent that it's reasonably necessary for them to, continue their investigation or present whatever they need at trial. So the burden can be shifted to them to present that justification through one of these types of actions. The question just becomes from a pragmatic standpoint. Manson is already fighting on so many fronts. Does he need to open up another one? What's the upside that he really gets from that? It may be one thing if there's a simplified process like we have in Washington to do this type of thing. But if he has to literally like file a whole separate lawsuit against LASO and litigate that, that just may be a bigger bite than he can take right now.
Wow. Wow. What do you think it would take for the DA to finally drop these charges? Like an election and then a Republican gets elected to the DA, or like what? I mean, this can just go on indefinitely?
Well, so it can go on as long as people allow it to go on, right? And so
Mhm.
that can change a couple of ways. One, it can change because you get somebody new in office, who has a different set of priorities. That can change it. It can be changed because somebody does finally try to hold his feet to the fire. An example of that would be an action like this. If you go and file an action against the LASO to argue that you need your towers back because there has been no real investigation happening for over a year, this investigation is not actually open, it's closed, you haven't done anything, you're just not willing to kind of formalize that through whatever box you check to say we're not doing anything with it. um, that's going to kind of set the stage for the court to be aware that hey, this is lingering out here. But in terms of like, is there a mechanism out there to force a prosecutor to close a case? No, there really isn't. Big old gap in the law.
Wouldn't it be ironic if Manson's fate rests on getting a Republican elected?
Well, it's no more ironic, I think, than MAGA America coming out in support of
Oh
Johnny
my
Depp.
god.
So
Oh my god. I mean, it's well, life does make strange bedfellows at
it
times. Okay,
does.
so let's talk briefly about the civil case coming up because okay, there's a whole other thing going on here where Manson asked the judge in that civil case,
Mhm.
the Jane Doe thing, he asked for an extension to get the trial bumped back until, there'd be an act of God and he would finally get his devices back from the DA. And the judge said no. And that just seems so wrong. Like there's stuff
Yeah.
on this guy's devices that it seems he believes would exonerate him. And I'm sure, if they take your devices, they're taking text, emails, whatever. So there are exchanges between him and this woman.
Mhm.
And he just can't have access to it. Like that just seems so wrong. I don't get
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, the judge has a lot of discretion on whether he's gonna make it go right now or whether he's going to postpone it. It definitely seems unfair to me. He did make the decision without prejudice, meaning you can come back and ask me again. So perhaps it's something like he wants Manson to make efforts to get access to it from the LASO, or exhaust those types of opportunities to try to get it back before the judge will allow a continuance on that basis. So I don't really know, without more context for kind of the basis of that ruling. But yeah, certainly on face value, it doesn't seem fair to me. But it not being fair is kind of just one of the risks that you take in civil litigation. Not fair isn't an appealable issue. It just means, the judge exercised his discretion in a way that probably doesn't result in real justice, but we defer to him to make that decision.
Well, I never heard of the justice system not being fair, so I don't know.
Right? No one's ever heard of such a thing.
Oh my god, it's so Kafkaesque. I'm gonna have to think about what you dropped on me there, seriously. But do you have any closing remarks?
Not really, just that this investigation really has dragged on incessantly. There's, no indication that anything is still ongoing. So, yeah, just as a matter of fairness, you would expect the prosecuting attorney needs to make a decision. But until there is some kind of legal framework to force him to do that, which currently does not exist, Manson's at his mercy.
Wow, just wow. All right, well, we'll have you on again to talk about developments as they come up. So it looks like, there's a trial now slated for October. The judge has refused to bump it back up to this point. So I imagine in the next, in 2 months, we'll either see a trial or we'll see a settlement. But yeah, I'm going to be thinking about this George Gascon thing because this is a whole new twist to it, and it makes it, frankly, it's a lot more sinister.
Mhm.
I mean, that's some crazy shit. Anyway, all right, Andrea, thank you so much. Everybody can check out Andrea's channel. I'll have everything linked below. And as always, appreciate your likes, subscribes, donations, and we'll see you next time. That was fire, man. They're gonna love that.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right, I'll see you soon. All right.